for joining us. I think we've all become very accustomed to these, but do make sure you can mute yourself if at all possible, just so we don't get as much echo and all of that. That's usually a problem on these, but otherwise it should work fairly slick. This meeting is kind of our regular fall meeting of the Idaho Invasive Species Council. This usually turns into a pretty good review of what happened in the last year for the department. So you'll hear some reports on program activities for noxious weeds, invasive species, pest survey from Paul. We'll get an update from Stephen Phillips from Pacific States a little later in the agenda, talking about federal legislation and appropriations. Obviously, a lot going on in that area of things. So I guess let's get going. If you have any questions, let us know. If we need to take a break somewhere along the way, we'll grab a chance or everybody go get another cup of coffee and we'll go. Nick, if you could make that a little bit bigger, I can't quite see it just on my little screen. Thank you. Okay, so really I'll just fire off with a couple of kind of not housekeeping, it's budget and rules. That's never really housekeeping, but touch base on a couple of those overarching things. 2021 was pretty busy for us from the standpoint of dealing, and I'm sure everybody that gives updates will talk a little bit about the labor situation. I think we all know that we're dealing with in the state. It presented some challenges for us here as well. We also in the last year did, and most of you I hopefully are aware because we tried to make sure everybody knew, certainly on this mailing list, of the negotiated rulemaking we did as part of the governor's zero-based rulemaking effort statewide. And the rules governing invasive species and noxious weeds was one of those that we worked on. Most of that work was prior to July 1 last spring. And all of that work really was, there's been a couple of other publications of the rules since then as part of that rulemaking process, but that rule will be in front of the legislature when they come back to town in January. The main thing we did in that with invasive species and noxious weed rule was to clean up our lists and how things were listed within that rule, predominantly in the invasive species rule. When that rule was originally put in place back in 2009, 10, we kind of dumped a lot of different things into that rule that were really belonged in other programs. And we did it because at the time we weren't real sure how this rule was going to work with some of our other programs, specifically in Plant Pest Act. So we had a lot of species in the invasive species rule that really didn't belong there and were regulated elsewhere within our statutes and rules. So the biggest change you saw on the invasive species portion of that rule is you saw us lift a lot of those species, all of those species up out of the invasive species rule, and we'll deal with those elsewhere within our division, within our statutes. It really cleaned that up. I think really focused on those species that we're most concerned with under the authority of the Invasive Species Act. It sounds a little bureaucratic and wonkish, but it's important for us to keep all of those kettles separate and keep everything where it ought to be. So that's probably the biggest change we had. We had a lot of good discussion on the noxious weed rule about the possibility of adding some species in there. We did not move forward to do that. I'm thinking of Russian olive in particular. We had some really good discussion. I was really pleased with the discussion that went on, but there really wasn't consensus to move forward with adding that species in particular. And I think it showed the importance of having a lot of our stakeholders and cooperators come together statewide to talk through an issue and what everybody's looking for and what everybody wanted to accomplish. So a very good process on that. As I mentioned, that rule will be in front of the legislature for their review in January. We're in a little bit of a weird thing currently and have been for the last couple of years with how all of these rules publish. So if you pay attention to such things very much, you know that there is a normal process as we go through that rulemaking process, wherein rules go through stages of, we notice them up for negotiated rulemaking, we then notice them up as pending rules, excuse me, as proposed rules. This year we added all these rules were temporary at one point, and now they're proposed. So we have that normal kind of cycle, but it gets kind of tweaked a little bit when the legislature doesn't take their action on their side. So you saw multiple publications of our entire rules package for the agency, including invasive species and weeds. And I know for some folks, every once in a while we get a call that people have a little confusion as to where we are in the playing field. But if you go to our website today, you will find the rule as it is currently and as it has been since approximately July 1, July 10 maybe is when that original thing published. But you'll see it there. It's up to date. It's current. And you can rely on that rule that's on the website if you need to. With regards to budget, really the budget continues to stay the course. We continue to, for invasive species activities, continue to really have funding come from primarily 3 different sources. The federal government, primarily through the Army Corps WRDA grant, although we do have some other smaller grants through Fish and Wildlife Services, Forest Service, and elsewhere that fund some of those activities. We also have general fund appropriation, and we also have the dedicated sticker fund. Those 3 sources combine to give us funding that takes care of replacing equipment, fixing up stations when we need to do some improvements there, the operations of watercraft inspection stations, law enforcement support, our full-time staff, everything they do. And we really continue to benefit from a stable budget scenario for us that is really, I think, important to the work we do, and at times makes us quite a bit different than some of our neighboring states. And so we're really blessed with having that good, consistent budget. The last couple of years with some of the challenges of the pandemic and that, really our focus has been on keeping stations up and running and staffed up as best we and our cooperators can do. That's been a challenge for everybody, as mentioned earlier. And it'll probably be a theme for some of the comments that'll probably happen with stations when folks, ask questions about operating hours and that sort of thing. But the budget has been consistent, and that's been helpful. We did have some questions and some I guess concerns with the federal vaccination mandate related to COVID. When that initially came out, there was a lot of concern about whether that mandate would affect our ability to continue to apply for and get the federal funding. It looks like they've backed off for a number of reasons. That requirement won't be included in our 2022 agreement with the Army Corps, so that WRDA money will still be there. But because of some of those policy discussions that have happened within the legislature and the governor's office, we expect that if a vaccine mandate was in place, we'd have to walk away from that WRDA money and focus on utilizing state funds. But that's all in place still currently today. That funding's consistent. We look forward to getting an agreement signed with Pacific states to utilize that WRDA money in 2022. I know they've had some meetings, and I imagine Stephen will probably touch on this later when he's with us. I know they've had some discussions within the Pacific states and Army Corps camp about how to approach that vaccine mandate. A lot of those discussions happened right up until last week. So we were kind of in a hold pattern a little bit, waiting for that picture to clear up. But otherwise, that funding is in place, and we're ready to go for 2022 to get agreements in place and get going. With that, I think that's really had all the updates I had in that arena. Anybody have any questions for me? Okay.
Perfect.
Awesome. Nick has the rulemaking page kind of pulled up from our website, and there's a couple of different ways you can get at the rules. If you just want to look at the current set of rules that we have, Nick, if you'll click on that Plants Division Laws and Rules down there on the left. There you go. And this is a good comprehensive page for everything we have for our division in particular. So you can see the Invasive Species Act, and you can see the Noxious Weed Act, and you can see the Plant Pest Act. But if you scroll down there so that the rules show up, the rules governing not invasive species and noxious weeds shows up there about halfway down that list. You can click on that and it'll take you to the current version of the rule. So pretty easy to get to. There's a cover sheet there, and then the rest of the clean rule falls out underneath that. Thanks, Nick. So with that, if there's no questions for me, I think we can go ahead and go on to the next presenter.
Just for quick housekeeping for the attendance, Jennifer Relman logged on. She's our Tech 3 up in North Idaho, so thanks for logging on. We also have Michelle Cox. She's with the Forest Service out of the Missoula area, so thank you for logging on, as well as Jim Nagler, University of Idaho out of Moscow. Excuse me. And that will update the list.
And Kathy Ford from ITD. Good morning, Kathy.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Lloyd.
Good morning.
All right, with that, we can go ahead and move on. I'll stop sharing. And Jeremy, if you want to go ahead and share your slides, we can move on to the noxious weed portion.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, Nick, for that introduction. And we'll go ahead and just get started and go over a quick update of the noxious weed program and kind of what occurred during 2021. Main areas that we're going to cover as we go through this update is terrestrial weeds, aquatic weeds, and then a little bit on the noxious weed free forage and straw program and the Mormont cricket and grasshopper program. So starting off with terrestrials. We have a couple new listings of terrestrial weeds. And then we also, I'm just going to give a quick update on the cost share program, the noxious weed distribution project, and then a little bit on the state noxious weed advisory committee. This weed here that it goes through was introduced to the committee in 2020 as it was a temporary rule that was issued by the director to add this species that was found in the Franklin County in the Preston area by a member of the Utah Department of Food and Ag that was up visiting that area and visiting some family and saw it and let us know that it was there. Currently we know of 3 population areas. We were able to get that temporary listed in 2020, and then with the updated new rule, we were able to get it on as an EDR species in the noxious weed rule. So again, this plant is a perennial. It does kind of like getting its feet wet. And this is just in the map just showing where in Idaho those little small populations are. It's all about total maybe 1/4 of an acre in size, but Franklin County has been doing a great job of controlling this. Kind of some IDing characteristics is that it looks very pea-like with these alternate leaves and then a pea-like flower. So just kind of keep your eye out for that new species. The other new terrestrial weed that was added was Turkish thistle. Again, this was something that we've kind of been keeping our eye on with a temporary listing in 2020. That was first identified in 2019, and it was the first instance of this species being found in the North American continent. And in Hell's Canyon of all places. We really thank the Oregon Department of Ag for letting us know that this was there. It was a really good catch, and so we did add it as an EDR species with the rule update. We do have a current agreement with a local cooperative weed management area that is doing a lot of survey and treatment for us this year, and we're looking forward to hearing their reports on their findings from 2021. It is a species that is dainty, I think is the right word to say. It does have the typical look of a thistle, and the spines being on there. It does have wings that go down the main stem. It does have a very light pink to purple flower. It really likes, as in the picture in the lower right, it really likes those rocky talus type areas. It grows really well in there. It is pretty small. It doesn't get very big like a Scotch thistle. It stays fairly small, and then is usually starting to desiccate by mid to late June, early July. It's starting to die off, and so it's one of those that comes on early, just kind of like cheatgrass does, and then dies off shortly thereafter. Okay, for the cost share program in 2021, we had 26 CWMAs apply. We awarded 23 CWMAs. You can see these funding amounts listed here, what those awards were for. The agreement period for these CWMAs did end on December 1st, and all the CWMAs are currently in the process of getting their final reports into us, and we're reviewing those. This graphic here just shows kind of what the funding levels are as far as awards go, and it shows that we are in a bit of a decline from last year, but I think that's mainly just due to we had 3 CWMAs that were not awarded this last year. It doesn't reflect that there was a drop in funding available. It's just more in drop in funds utilized. Some of the main changes that occurred between 2021 or in 2021 was we did start up some trainings for CWMAs. In 2021, we first started with a mandatory grant administration training for all of those that were 23 CWMAs that were awarded funds. It was basically to kind of go over what was expected of them as far as their grant reporting for those term reports and making sure that we were getting adequate information turned in with those. And then at the end of the year, in November, we did have a cost year end of year training to help get their applications ready for 2022. And speaking of 2022, the cost year handbook is out. It has been updated since about November or so, or excuse me, October is when it first came out. And there's no really big changes from 2021 to 2022. There were some updates that were made to the requirement for GIS GPS data recording, and then some updates to one of the exhibits, which is the conflict of interest form. But other than that, there was not a whole lot of changes. And if there's anything cost share related that anybody has, I'd be more than happy to answer those questions at any time as those come up. For the noxious weed distribution project, this is one of those things that's listed in the statute under state powers. It's one of the first things that's listed in there that we can request from counties, annual work plans or reports, and mainly dealing with the presence of noxious weeds and other information. And so a few years ago, we did start asking the counties for an annual report on the distribution of noxious weeds in their counties. This is what's kind of evolved to is we have a web form based reporting platform where each county has the ability to get on here, and through this fishnet diagram here, they're able to identify where their species are in relation to their county for more of a statewide approach instead of an individual instance basis. It really helps to give us a better picture. Our GIS analyst has really spent a lot of time on this platform, making sure it's easier for them to be able to come in and edit and make sure that these species are available to them. And he's been really spearheading this project and doing a good job with it. Because the main purpose of this is to give us that statewide perspective of where weeds are in Idaho. Everything from these high presence weeds, such as spotted knapweed, that are pretty present in Idaho, to other species that are kind of more moderate, that are your yellow star thistles, that there are some population areas that are known, and others that is just small and sporadic. And to the ones that are even less than that, where we have like salt cedar depicted here, where it's really kind of just interspersed, and it really kind of gives us that statewide view of what the full infestations look like for each of these species based on an annual presence report from these counties. So that's been really beneficial for us to be able to look at these and be able to kind of evaluate where projects are occurring on the ground for things like cost share, as well as for listings, and when we're evaluating the rule like we did this last year of does its current category match its infestation level. Of this project, of the 44 Idaho counties, all have done a really good job of getting their stuff in. We do have a few that are still outstanding. There's 10 counties that haven't reported yet, but are in process. So once we get a full capture of this data, then we'll be able to update our information statewide. And what we use this information for, first and foremost, is for the generation of reports such as this one. That is just a quick fact sheet on an invasive plant that's on the noxious weed list. This is oxeye daisy here, and you can see the map to the right that does show where oxeye daisy is known to occur in the state of Idaho. This is very beneficial as an education outreach tool for individuals either at the state level or at the local level as well. The Idaho Noxious Weed Advisory Committee. This committee was formed in late 2022. We had our first meeting exactly a year ago today. And the main duties of this committee that was reformed was to aid in the development of implementation of a statewide noxious weed management strategy, aid in the evaluation of cost share projects and research proposals, and then advise the director on matters pertaining to the state noxious weed program. And this is what was talked about in the first meeting of this. This is a quick snapshot of those members of this Noxious Weed Advisory Committee, and you can see there there's representation from state agencies, federal agencies, tribes, and the noxious weed, the representative of noxious weed superintendents from different regions. So some of the things that were accomplished by the committee during 2021 was the subcommittee was set for the cost share review committee for 2021. They are the ones that sat on the board. And those members did meet, they did evaluate and did pass on recommendations to the director for the cost share program for this year. There were also members that were updated and involved in the negotiated rulemaking process for the noxious weeds, invasive species noxious weeds, and noxious weed free forage and straw rule that went through negotiated rulemaking this year. And then they did have an opportunity this late summer to review the cost share handbook and the edits that were going to be made for 2022 and to offer comments. The next meeting that we'll have with the review committee will be on December 16th, which is tomorrow. And they'll be meeting to kind of set and get ready for the next iteration of the cost share program, and then a light discussion on the next iteration of the invasive species plan for the next go around. So that is Noxious Weed Advisory Committee. Moving on to aquatics. Same thing as thresholds. We're going to go over some new listings and then talk a little bit about surveys and treatments. Unfortunately, I had a computer issue this morning. The new listing that was listed in this last rule go around is the new listing of starry stonewort as an EDR species. This species does track the same as the infestation of zebra and quagga mussel. It started in the Great Lakes and is now making its way westward with movement of watercraft and water-related items. It is cold tolerant. It does well with cold water environments, and just with some concern of that species possibly being and moving the same as the mussels, we wanted to make sure that this was listed so as if there was a potential of the species being seen as being brought in, we could be more proactive on the control of that species. As far as surveys go, we were able to hire seasonal staff this year, and so we had, with that benefit, we had more surveys that took place this year, and we did see an uptick in our events. This is a quick snapshot from our dashboard that we have available that does show the number of surveys that were taken, and you can see here it's just over 16,000 individual surveys that were taken throughout the state of Idaho. You can see on the bar graphic that's really condensed above, you can go by each lake and water body to see how many were conducted on each individual water body there. So it's really good information to be able to see where things are occurring in the state, and that we did have a higher number of surveys that took place this last year. And with that, we did have increased treatment. This is for the herbicide treatment. This is the image of the airboat of Clean Lakes on Bear Lake. They were treating for Eurasian water milfoil in this image. But this year we did treat about 491 chemical acres of aquatic noxious weeds. Primarily, the two species that we treated with the chemical treatments were Eurasian water milfoil and curly-leaf pondweed. You can see each of the projects listed below and their acreages. So we did have quite a bit going on. Some of the highlights were the 18 acres in Bear Lake that you saw in that picture previously with the airboat. That was kind of a challenging year this year just due to the lower water that was present there, and there's still the presence of Eurasian water milfoil in about a foot to a foot and a half of water. So they were able to bring that airboat down to still be able to accomplish the treatments that we needed to get that species under control in that lake. They did a very good job. And then on the other half of that, we also did have a lot of diver work going on this year, primarily for Eurasian water milfoil and for flowering rush, and that was done by Aquatic Weed Solutions as our contractor. You can see their boat in the lower right-hand corner there. This is working in the Blue Heart Springs area, which was a newly identified Eurasian water milfoil population on a spring just off of the Snake River, and is a high tourism spot for coming in and seeing some crystal blue clear water. So they did a lot of work down there, and also a lot of work on flowering rush this year in both our Blackfoot population and on Lake Pend Oreille. For all of the information on all of our treatments that we conduct for ISDA, for whether it's through our contractors or through ISDA staff, a really good place to become familiar with on our Invasive Species of Idaho website. On there, there's a tab for annual treatment plans. On there, there's a link for a treatment map as well as our survey dashboard, so you can kind of monitor what's going on throughout the state and where we are in process for treatments. One treatment I'd like to give a little more information on, this has been kind of a highlight for the last couple of years, is we have been treating curly-leaf pondweed on Hayden Lake. The main purpose of this study was designed to be able to look at what we were doing and evaluate how well it was working based on the presence of curly-leaf pondweed and its turions, its main form of reproduction. We did study that, or target our study to occur in the fall between summer die-off and winter growth. And this is usually in about the month of October. We started this in 2019 after the first large-scale treatment of curly-leaf pondweed. And the main way that we do it is in this picture of Nick here in the lower right, is by utilizing a ponar dredge that goes down and does a small grab of the benthic sediments and brings up, and we look for those turions. That you can see in this image here. It's just kind of a little pine cone almost like structure. And the way that we would test viability was very, very, very easy to delineate, in that it was, if it was squishy and soft, we called it non-viable because there wasn't enough material there to grow new plants. And we did do a in-house study to make sure that the turions that we collected, whether they were, if we deemed them viable just based on that squeeze test, if they were, and the main results that came off of that was that the squishy ones were non-viable and the harder ones were viable. So we felt fairly confident in our analysis of that. The map on the right just shows where we've been grabbing those benthic grabs from throughout Hayden. We have had a challenge in the northern portion of the lake in that it's been shallow up in there and there's a lot of native plant growth. So making access in that late October timeframe a little bit more difficult to get a watercraft up there to be able to conduct that. But these are the general areas in which we are grabbing those on an annual basis. We did rework the maps this year to try and be a little bit more analytical of the data to see how things are looking based on interpolation. I really have to thank Saul Teska for taking this project on. He did an amazing job with this, of helping to get this data out in a way that is consistent across each year. So we see here in 2019, we can see that there's a pretty widespread population, that about almost 300 acres of a treatment area. And then following up the next year based on turions, we did notice kind of a shift of the hot spot more up towards that northern, I guess you'd say northeastern corner of our treatment area, and it becoming fairly less in those lower reaches. We can see in that bay that's on the lower right, where we didn't record any, kind of starting to see that reduction in size a little bit. And then as we get to 2021, we can start to see a little bit more draw in of that curlyleaf pondweed. So we're starting to see an actual reduction in the amount of presence of curlyleaf pondweed. It should be noted, however, we have noticed quite a large resurgence of native plant growth within our treatment area, which is a good thing. It just makes kind of getting the benthic grabs a little bit more difficult as well, because you have to get around the plant matter to be able to get a decent grab of that benthic sediment. But all in all, we're still able to kind of show that our results are starting to trend towards a reduction in curlyleaf pondweed, which is what our intent is. With this species, we don't think that we'll ever be able to fully control and eradicate it from this lake, but we want to get it under a manageable level where the native species help to keep it in check and not allow it to get as widespread and create the problematic issues that were first experienced in 2019. So that's the curlyleaf pondweed project. In addition to the treatments that we do utilizing the statewide contractors, there is a lot of treatment that does occur with ISDA staff. And primarily those species that we're doing those on are hydrilla, parrot feather, milfoil, flowering rush, and Eurasian water milfoil. We'll go over each of these respectively. For hydrilla, this has kind of been a ongoing project in 4 areas known in Idaho. And it's been a very good success with a weed that's very, very problematic. This is just some quick identifying characteristics. If you're not familiar with hydrilla and haven't heard about it before, it does have whorls of 4 to 8 serrated leaves. The main characteristic that it kind of looks like an Elodea, our native Elodea, but the one thing that really stands out is that tuber that you can see in that lower, smaller picture there, that the little potato that it creates that it can continue to regenerate itself from. It is known as the worst aquatic weed. So taking this challenge head on has been a challenge for ISDA for several years. I'll kind of give you some quick snapshot of what things have been going on. Of these 4 main population areas, you can see here that there are, and it has been going on for a while. Since 2007 for the Bruno populations, the Ada population since 2008, and then Twin Falls, Buell area since 2015 and 2017. So for Ada County, this is in a hot ditch in Boise. It was just a hand removal. It's kind of in one of these ditches that's very typical of Boise, in that the property fences come up to either side of the ditch, and the ditch is in the background and kind of almost forgotten a little bit. And the original site, when it was originally found, you can see the points here of where it was known to exist in its original year of being found. But we are on our 6th year of no plants being found in this location. So we are still checking it. We still plan to check it for a couple more years, making sure that we don't have any reestablishment of hydrilla in this hot ditch. But it's trending really, really well so far. I'm really proud of this result at this location. The other one in Owyhee County is the Bruno River. This has had chemical application, mechanical removal, hand removal, and biocontrol work on it. And I'm going to go through a quick kind of progression here for year to year of the establishment, or from how much hydrilla is to where we are currently. And we can see visually really quickly that the trend is really trending downward as we're removing more and more of the hydrilla from the river system. And in 2019 we had 3, and in 2020 we had 2. The big news for this year, for 2021, I really have to thank and commend Bethany and her crew. It's been working on this very diligently this year, especially. We've had no plants in the Bruno River system. That's a huge success. And kind of, especially, it's kind of not known for hydrilla, as it's been a battle across the entire continent. Everybody talks about it in different states about how hard it is and challenging it is to get some control on this species. But here we're showing that control is working, and very proud of the results of no plants being found in the river this year. So here's just showing that downward trend from 2013 on, down to 0 plants this year. Really, really big success. For the Twin Falls County area, so this is in the Buell area as well as in the Twin Falls area. It's had both mechanical hand removal and biological control. And by biological control, it's the triploid carp. So it is one of those that it is going there, and it does feed on the hydrilla plant and does a really good job in those enclosed ponds where they can keep it off and not allow that biocontrol agent to escape. So for the Twin Falls and Buell populations, Buell's on the left, Twin Falls is on the right. This is a progression map from 2017 on. In mid-2017 is when the population in Twin Falls was identified, and that's why you see this blow up in 2018 as we start to really get after that population and getting it under control. And then a continual downtrend. And to the current snapshot of this year, we're really down to just a few hundred plants being found from 11,000, just over 11,000 plants in 2016 to just 156 plants this year being found in both locations. So again, it's trending in a very, very positive way, very similar to the Bruno population. And so we'll just continue to keep working at this population as needed, and hopefully work towards that 0 number like we've seen at with the Bruno River. Moving on to parrot feather. This is a project that we started in 2019, really kind of evaluating where we have parrot feather milfoil, and where we have documented areas of infestation are in Gem County and in Jerome County. We do know kind of offhand some in Ada County, but we haven't been able to get an exact location yet from some of the irrigation districts and from the county that we've been working with, trying to get those answers from them. So of the two that we do know of, first we'll take a quick look at the Gem County populations. This year we were able to survey a large portion of the Payette River from the point of where we knew there was existing parrot feather milfoil downstream looking for parrot feather milfoil. We did find quite a bit of it. Most surprising of all was we did find some going into the Snake River there on the upper left of this map. So we were able to get a really good survey on kind of where it's at, and then starting to make plans for 2022 as to how I'll start addressing the parrot feather issue in this river system. And just for those that aren't familiar with parrot feather, this is the easiest way to see it. It looks like a little Christmas tree that pokes out of the top of the water. Very bright neon green. One of the things that you can see here is it does, as it fills the top of that and becomes a mat, it does really impede water flow. And it can be quite an issue, and is a great breeding ground for mosquitoes. This is one of the areas that we're really looking at in the upper portion of the Payette River. This is a spring that's off of, or I guess you should call it more of a seep off of the Payette. It does eventually lead to the Payette River, but all the water is kind of groundwater that's coming out of the hill from irrigation above or from natural springs. Here we have Sam here, one of our technicians. This is the population in the Payette River here. Just some of it are very small, usually behind some brush. Is what we were seeing most of the time, or brush or deadfall in the water, and making enough of an eddy for these plants to float in and then establish. One of the things that in these main areas, we did start hand removals in 2019. We did some in 2019 and a little bit in 2020. And in those areas, we did notice that this year there was a smaller amount of, or less amount of density in those areas than in others. But it's still present, still there. So moving forward towards 2022, one of the things that we are looking into is a chemical treatment in this area where it is most dense. As you can see, this flyover video here on the right, it's pretty much filling this portion of the spring and seep completely 100% full. And we were looking at how do we help reduce the plant density here. And one of those ways is through a chemical application. We've seen a lot of good results with one of our herbicides that we have on contract. And we're looking into be able to use it in 2022. We tried for this fall, but there was a little bit too much water flow occurring as the farmers were shutting off their irrigation Seems to be a little bit more resurgence in some of the spring flows. So we're going to kind of really evaluate that flow again in the spring, either late spring, early summer, to try and skip that initial runoff period and try to get it as the plants are growing and making sure that they're not having any die-off issues either, just due to natural senescence in the winter times as we're seeing right now. So that'll be kind of coming forward, but it is an issue that we're trying to get our hands wrapped around and start addressing. For the population that is in the Jerome County area, this is a natural spring near the Blue Lakes golf course here. This is kind of a known population. It's just kind of off in this little spring that's just right off the main road, access road to the golf course. It's been there for a few years, and this is our initial foray into parrot feather milfoil and control of parrot feather milfoil. As you can see from these pictures here, it looks kind of brushy. There's a lot of Russian olive around this. We did bring in our suction dredge and really try to get after the mats of these. We didn't do any chemical application in this area. We did, however, the golf course did cut out a lot of the Russian olive, so it eased our access. And this is the most recent image that was taken in August. And we're happy to report that we haven't seen any additional growth since May of this year. So really kind of happy to see that no further parrot feather was seen in 2021. We'll continue to monitor this site and see how what the results are of our endeavors in the first controlling of parrot feather milfoil. Next species is flowering rush. As you can see here, we have really two main population areas, the northern Idaho population and then the southeastern population Idaho. We do have one small population in Idaho County, but the county's been doing a good job on it. It's a small isolated pond, and they've been working with that landowner to get that under control. So for ISDA staff, we did participate in a work day up on Dog Beach early in the spring before water up. This had people from the local counties as well as the Lakes Commission up there kind of trying to put some new blood into this project at Dog Beach, trying to control some flowering rush there by just doing a hand pull day. We also had a project that was fairly large in the survey aspect from our Eastern Idaho group, doing a lot of surveys along the 120 plus miles of Snake River, trying to see where all we have establishment of flowering rush in that Snake River system. One of this is just the positive points from their survey activities that started in Idaho Falls, coming down all the way to below American Falls. One of the most surprising areas is the Shelley area. This is just a quick video that shows the amount of flowering rush that was found in that Shelley area. You can see the waters are pretty shallow in the area where they're taking this image here, but it's going to be one of those areas as we start thinking about control of flowering rush. How do we address an area like this in the Snake River where there's a large, highly dense population of flowering rush in the stream? Up north, we did have some work that occurred on flowering rush in the Farragut State Park area and the Buttonhook Bay. These images were taken by Dr. Kim Holzer up there, our specialist up there. And you can see here in these images, we have our technician up there working on digging out some flowering rush in this population area that's in this Buttonhook Bay area. This is a smaller population area, and it's kind of a far removed from all of the main populations, which is typically in the more northern part of the lake and along that Pend Oreille River system. So they've been doing a good job of getting after this one. Next species is Eurasian water milfoil. Just a quick recap of the distribution areas that we have of Eurasian water milfoil. One that's kind of barely seen is in that bottom right corner. You can just kind of see just a sliver. That's the Bear Lake population. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. You heard me mention earlier the Blue Heart Springs project. This is where we had a Eurasian water milfoil that was identified in 2020 and into the 2021 early. We were able to get in there early in the spring to start going after Eurasian water milfoil in this very high tourism spot. There's a lot of traffic that goes in and out of here. It's as you can see by the pictures here, very blue, very clear water to be able to see the growth of these plants. And so we started going in here, just ISDA staff with suction harvesting, trying to be very careful to remove these plants. You can see one of our nets set up there in the upper picture in April, where we were capturing any of the potential fragments as we started working on the Eurasian water milfoil. And then if you look at off the bow of that red canoe there, you can see the amount of bio volume that we were removing just from a small work area in that day. So there's a lot of Eurasian water milfoil present in this, as well as a lot of native species. And so as we worked through this, we were just really trying to get that milfoil out of there. You can see by our picture in June, we did have quite a bit of impact, but we saw that as June came into July and things really started warming up, we couldn't keep up with the current resurgence of plant growth in there. So we did bring in the contractor in around June, July, and had them start working through this. I was not able to get another aerial image. The weather hasn't cooperated on days that I can make it out there, but I will try to get another one. But in this image here, you can really see that there was a lot more blue. On site, we did see that a lot of the darker spots were just sediment. They did a really good job of getting in there and removing a lot of that plant bio volume. So we're hopeful as we continue to monitor this throughout the winter and into next spring that we'll really start to have a beneficial impact on that Eurasian water milfoil in this spring, just off the Snake River there. For Bear Lake, this was first identified in 2019, and that population's in the lower left-hand corner of the lake there before it hits the Utah border. We really got out proactive and trying to attack this species in there because it was the first instance of Eurasian water milfoil in eastern Idaho. We've had a few treatments. We had a treatment in 2020, and then again here this year in 2021, we did have some treatments. This is all the positive locations of Eurasian water milfoil, and as you notice, coming off the top of the lake there, through the National Fish and Wildlife's refuge there, along the canal that comes off of there, there is some Eurasian water milfoil that has established in that area. The main areas that we did treat was where you can see these more tightly clustered points here on the lower left, lower right, and that tight cluster within that canal system. Those were where our 18 acres of Eurasian water milfoil treatment took place this year. All of the individual points, our staff in eastern Idaho did take out a dredge and were able to handful or suction harvest those Eurasian water milfoil plants. Working in Bear Lake is kind of fun because the water is very clear. So you can kind of see those plants going down and be able to identify them really well. And we kind of had to do a two-pronged attack this year because the water level did drop quite a bit. In the picture in the lower side, you can kind of see that brown line of shoreline as it's being exposed. That was a benefit to us. And some of our original establishment areas were outside of the water this year. So hopefully we'll get a good freeze this winter and hopefully have a beneficial impact on those root crowns in that area and keep them from coming back. But the kayaks were the primary tool for survey this year, just because a lot of times, because of such the shallowness of the shelf of Bear Lake, it could be 50, 60 yards of only 2 feet deep water. So those kayaks really were the way to go for us to be able to identify it. And then in the picture in the upper right is the mat that was in that wildlife refuge area. And I just have to call out to their staff. They took some amazing pictures this year, and this is our survey merman. I just had to throw that in there. It was too funny of a picture not to pass up for aquatic surveys. We have one additional area for Eurasian water milfoil that we kind of knew about from historically. There was some Eurasian water milfoil present in the Clear Springs trout hatchery that's in the same center image here. We hadn't seen it for a little while, and going back, we did see some resurgence of plants. We did a DNA analysis last year, and it came back as a native species. And then this year, it came back as positive for Eurasian water milfoil in these 2 locations. The upper point was just a very, very small population. The lower point was a more dense, heavily dense population in that lower pond area there below the golf course. But we were able to do some work in 2021, and this is Aaron, our Central Region Specialist. doing some dive work here to attack that smaller population that's upstream, trying to get as much of that removed. The challenge with this area here on the image on the right is you can kind of see some of those mats as they exist, but underneath them are large boulders that the water depth can go from 2 feet to 10 feet pretty quick, and then just those tight crevices where the irrigation water milfoil is growing out of can make it kind of difficult to get it removed. So we'll continue to work on this area going into 2022 as well. Okay, I believe I have the next portion of this is going to be our new coordinator for the noxious weed free forage and hay program and our grasshopper program, Kayla Montrose. Are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
All right, go ahead and take it away.
All right, so I'm Kayla Montrose. I'm the new program specialist for both the Grasshopper Mormon Cricket Control Program and the Noxious Weed Free Forage and Straw Program. I've been with ISDA for about 3 years now. However, I just started my new role with these programs back in April. So if you have any questions regarding either program, feel free to reach out at any time. So I'm going to start with a twine update. NASMA is switching twine colors starting next year from the purple and yellow to blue and orange. And this is due to the production issue with their supplier. So we'll still continue to use the purple and orange twine until our current inventory is depleted. And then additionally, there will only be 3 knot strengths offered, and they're listed down there. And next slide. And so this graph is an 11-year summary kind of comparison of the total acres certified, as well as the certified straw versus hay acres. This year there was 26,765 acres certified within 27 counties, and 99% of those acres were certified to the NASMA or the North American standard. So that is about 1,500 acres less than last year, but that's likely due to the drought conditions that we saw this year. Next slide. So for the Grasshopper Mormon Cricket program, it was definitely a busy year. We received a total of 276 landowner requests for assistance, which is quite a bit more than last year also. 70% of those requests came in from the Southwest Idaho region. And then we did conduct 1 right-of-way treatment in Owyhee County, and that was to mitigate potential roadway hazards due to the slick that is caused by Mormon crickets when they get run over. And so we treated a total of 42 miles of Highway 51 near the Duck Valley border. And next slide. So this graph shows the historical carbaryl bait usage. And this year we had we distributed over just over 114,000 pounds of bait to landowners spanning 25 counties. And you can see that although it was an extremely busy year, we actually distributed less bait than last year. And that is because there was a significant increase in the acres treated through our reimbursement program. And so that was increasing from about 2,700 acres treated through the reimbursement program in 2020 to over 16,000 acres this year. So this chart shows the acres treated through bait distribution versus the reimbursement program for this year and last. And so you can see that the overall acres treated this year was quite a bit higher. And then lastly, since we saw such an increase in landowner reimbursements this year, we will be providing a landowner handbook to kind of help guide the landowners through the somewhat complicated reimbursement process. There's a lot of requirements that they have to abide by, so it's a little bit confusing for them, and so this handbook should be a nice guide to get them through the process more efficiently. And that is my quick update for these 2 programs, and I'll hand it back over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Kayla. All right. All right, and so with that, that's the end of the noxious weed program update. And I'll go ahead and turn it back to Nick unless there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Any questions for the noxious weed program update? It's a great update, Jeremy. I appreciate hitting all the high points, and especially Kayla filling us in with the latest and greatest from the noxious weed forage and straw, and as well as grasshopper Mormon cricket programs. It's always good to hear. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question or drop it in the chat. Okay. I'll just keep my eye on the chat room in case something pops up. But for the participants list, Devin from Teton County has joined us. Thank you, Devin, for jumping on. Pam Juker, ISDA Chief of Staff, has joined us as well. Thank you, Pam. Raymundo Rodriguez, we've worked with Raymundo for a number of years. He's with ITD, and him as well as Kathy Ford has helped us in a number of different projects. And then Marianne, I believe that's Marianne Stoll from the Hayden Watershed Group, Hayden Lake in northern Idaho. Okay. Well, hearing no questions and seeing nothing pop up in the chat, let's go ahead and take just a quick 5-minute break, stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee. I'll get my presentation teed up, which I'll go next, and I'll start at, let's say 10:07. We'll do a 5-minute break. So again, thank you all for joining today. I think we are pretty much up to date on the participants list. And I'll just jump right into the presentation. So you've probably seen this slide many times, just a basic breakdown of the invasive species program. Many of these areas kind of blend together with the noxious weed program as well as sharing the staff across the state. And the invasive species program is split up into 4 main areas. Probably our strongest and most visible arm is the prevention program. Watercraft inspection, we'll be talking quite a bit about that today. I also added in today just to talk a little bit about product inspection, and more specifically with the Merrimack mossball issue, and we'll have a few slides on that. That's something that goes on year-round between our invasive species staff as well as our plant industries, field services type investigators that are out there looking for things, but it's not as visible as the watercraft inspection program. We'll also be talking about our early detection monitoring, whether that's looking for mussels or other invasive species outlined in rule, talking about a little bit about management and control, whether that's active control programs or rapid response planning, and then we also have a permitting program, and then we'll end a little bit on education outreach. We cover these areas throughout the state with various staff. So myself and Jeremy Varley, who you just heard from, we cover the statewide perspective for both programs. You'll also see a lot of data and slides from Saul Teska. He's our GIS analyst, also covers statewide. Saul is based here in Boise. You just heard from Kayla, who oversees the noxious weed forage and straw, grasshopper Mormon cricket program. And then scattered out throughout the state, we have a great resource and a lot of passion and talent in our program specialists as well as our Tech 3s. So we have Kim Holzer and Jenny Roman up in North Idaho, Bethany Muffley and Sam here in Boise. Aaron Ursenbach, he's kind of a lone wolf there in Twin Falls. He covers a pretty wide range of country and just a program specialist there working out of our Twin Falls office. And then we've got Cole Morrison and Maddie Patterson working out of our Idaho Falls office. And you can just see kind of the territory that some of those folks travel and the region that they cover. It's broken up by counties. And then you probably noticed through Jeremy's talk as well as occasionally we will perform a survey blitz or just an intensive survey or treatment of a specific species or a specific area. And so we may pull some talent from, say, in Boise to go up to North Idaho, or Boise and Twin Falls to go over and help Cole in Idaho Falls. Or sometimes we all go to one region and we blitz that area. And so that's just a way that we can help manage workload and priorities that we set forth, and how we get things done. There are also another team within Plant Industries that works under field services, and there are multiple ag investigators spread out across the state that do, you'll hear about them a little bit in the pest survey, and then we've also called upon their help as far as things in the marketplace. And so they can be in Post Falls and Moscow, Lewiston area, scatter out across southwest Idaho, mainly in Boise, based here in Boise, Twin Falls, Idaho Falls. But they are also a great resource as well that we can pull from when we really need some help. And then it goes back and forth. So, when they're getting a little tight on workload and need some help, then we help them out as well. And it kind of works out, especially this year when we had some challenges with available labor and meeting that need at various times, say during harvest. Sometimes it's all hands on deck. So we just got to get the work done, and sometimes that's what we do best. So that kind of leads into this next discussion, but let's take a step back and talk about Marimo mossballs in general. It's actually an algae. It's a very popular aquarium type species that you'll see. They form a small ball that you can put into your aquarium. And it's not the moss that we're concerned about. It's actually a hitchhiker that's contained within the moss or clinging onto the moss. And so the first detection of zebra mussels on Marimo mossballs was actually in a pet store in Seattle, Washington. It was an employee of the pet store, and they saw something and they heard a little bit about it, and so they said something. In invasive species and noxious weed world, we talk about this all the time, say something, see something, say something. If you see something that looks weird, find somebody to tell, because it could be something of concern. And so that happened in March 2nd of 2021, which March is a typical time of year where we're getting boat check stations up and going, and we're redoing our training, and we're kind of ramping up. And so then we throw mossballs in there, and it kind of created a certain workload that we had to work through. But I'll say that March 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, it was just inundated with hundreds of emails. And you'll hear later from Stephen Phillips, and he kind of took a different scope of coordinating the effort more on a region scale. Or if you talk to, Leo Elwell with Invasive Species Act Network and kind of her scope. And I think we can all say that there was just a lot of emails and there was a lot of communications. And that's one thing that the invasive species team in general can do quite well, whether that's within a specific region or within states or provinces. They're just multi-layers. This number could have changed, and maybe Laura can give us an update. But last I heard, there was 46 states and multiple provinces that had contaminated product. And most of these were being sold through Petco and PetSmart, which I'll cover a little bit later. But that'll give you an idea of just the scale and the scope of this issue. And we just had, in Idaho, a small portion of the entire pie. But more specifically of how we responded to this detection is within 24 hours of that March 2nd timeframe, which it came out in the afternoon, and then we kind of brainstormed. We got a small group together, and we said, well, how many stores, how many Petcos and PetSmarts do we have in Idaho? That was kind of the first step. So we identified 18 stores within Idaho that may have potentially received contaminated product. And then following that, another 24 hours or 48 hours, essentially from the initial detection, Idaho had made the rounds across the state, once again utilizing local, state, or federal staff. Most of them were ISDA employees that were within the invasive species program. you know, Kim and Cole and Bethany and Aaron and their Tech 3s, they were out looking. But the response was just tremendous. I mean, we had folks in the far corners of the state that were aware of the issue, and they were out looking at their local mom and pop pet stores and letting me know what they found, and that was just tremendous. Our inspections in Idaho really focused on two main parts. It was identifying the contaminant, being zebra mussels, and then verifying the identity, and hopefully we got some form of viability tests as well. We were able to do that. We were able to verify zebra mussels were within the packages, and we started pulling product off the shelf. At first, it was more of a regulatory function. We were going in there and pulling product off the shelf and writing up stop sales and going through that. And then what we found is Petco and PetSmart about halfway through the day became very cooperative. So they had received the communication down from headquarters, basically telling them to remove the product, you know, comply with any requests, and just have everything just waiting for us to do our inspection and go through those steps. And so that was really nice to see. I mean, it was almost immediate in the whole scale of time compared to you know, the initial detection to when folks were going out looking, and then when that communication came out from headquarters, it was very quick, which was nice to see. All in all, throughout the state, removed just over 600 units. What I mean by a unit, that could be a package. Let me go back, say a package of these Beta Buddies, or it could be a single moss ball, because sometimes they sell them in bulk. So 600 units, and these are the stores throughout Idaho. You can see they're kind of scattered out. So we had some good help from both the ISDA invasive staff as well as the ag investigators to be able to quickly visit each one of these stores, talk with their store managers, and inspect the product. Most of these were disposed either by freezing or boiling. Some states even did incineration as well. And so that was basically the next step. And then through these, we were also able to identify 6 additional stores that received Marimo mossballs. And so we were able to get that removed from the sales floor as well. The next step, especially for Idaho and then in general, was to give a general public outreach type bulletin, basically outlining if you purchased a Marimo mossball, what do you do next? What do you look for? How do you dispose of any issues, and who do you call? And so, you know, Idaho did, you know, two or three different media releases. There was a federal release, and then essentially every other state did a release as well. And the outreach was just tremendous on this issue. There was also several YouTube influencers that kind of caught wind of it, that work within that aquarium type realm, and they put out some great material, good YouTube videos basically explaining the issue and how to go through the steps of disposal. And some of those went, you know, viral in a sense that within their industry, they had several thousand views. You know, it's pretty powerful. So the next steps moving forward, there continues to be this federal inspection process upon import. That was all tightened up. One of the issues is you had a USDA inspection for a non-plant type pest. And so zebra mussels may not be a thing that USDA APHIS is looking for. And I kind of look to Brian or Laura to help correct me if I'm wrong, but that's essentially why this wasn't on the radar. That has been fixed. And since March, there has been one importation, and that shipment was seized by USDA, then transferred to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They did identify zebra mussels on it, and I don't know if it's still being held or if it has been disposed of. I haven't heard the latest update on that, but so the system is essentially working. On the state side, we do routine store visits now following a Don't Let It Loose outreach that Invasive Species Action Network performed. And then we're going out and doing those return visits. And then we have seen some mothball alternatives in the marketplace. And then we also shifted some of our routine monitoring towards more small urban lakes and ponds for both adult surveys and villager plankton tows, just as a follow-up as well. To give you an idea of the Petco locations, you can see Idaho there. We had several of them scattered, but just to give you an idea of the scale, you look at states like California and Washington and Oregon, and the volume of Petcos that they have, Texas, as well as the Eastern Seaboard in Florida. There's just a lot of Petcos. And once again, the last I heard was 46 states. So that's a lot. And then next is the PetSmart locations. We just had a few of those in Idaho and scattered out, but you'll see once again, they're all over the United States. So before I move on, is there any questions on Marimo mothballs? I know that was definitely a hot topic in March. Any comments from the group? Feel free to use the chat if you want. Okay. Well, moving on, I'll just start talking a little bit about the watercraft inspection season. This year was our 13th year. We inspected just under 114,000 watercraft throughout the state, and we're just under 1 million throughout the history of the program. So a lot of boats. This year we intercepted 52 of them with mussels on them or contained within them. And out of that, 24 of them were destined to Idaho. And I'll have a slide that kind of helps break that out even further. 18 inspection stations throughout the state. You can see on the map here that I just pulled off the dashboard, which you can access anytime. There's still the strategy is to position the watercraft inspection stations around the perimeter of the state, inspecting watercraft as they're coming in, focusing on those high-risk watercraft that are coming from known infested water bodies. And so that's the strategy. Again, you'll see this since 2017, 2018, but we extended the night operations. We're inspecting 18 hours at Malad, Cedars, and Jackpot, same as last year. And then we're still at 24 hours at Cottrell and I-84. We did extend the season once again this year. Most stations were operating through the end of September, if not October. So we stretched it out on the back end just to try to capture that. And then I'll have a slide on the law enforcement support. And the picture there in the bottom, that's just at the Cottrell I-84 port of entry. You can see the lights set up there in the banner. And that station is pretty well lit and pretty well equipped for inspecting watercraft at night. And it's a well-oiled machine. Ran through the West Casual Soil Water Conservation District. Here are our 2021 station cooperators. And so you can kind of see in your respective region who's operating the check stations. Feel free to reach out to them if these are probably one of our strongest partnerships throughout the state for the invasive species program. So you'll see Bonner Soil Water Conservation District in North Idaho, Bruno, Rayola's here on the phone. Feel free to reach out to Rayola on her 2 stations at Bruno and Marcine. Kootenai Shoshone, they're based out of Coeur d'Alene area. They operate 4 stations. Lemhi County, they operate a station on North Fork that's mainly driven by the non-motorized rafting community. Mid-Snake RC&D in Twin Falls County operate Highway 93 Jackpot. Oneida Soil Water Conservation District, they're in Malad. And actually, I need to add Franklin County. They've taken on the Franklin inspection station. Shoshone Paiute Tribe continues to operate Duck Valley as well as West Casual Soil Water Conservation District. That was in the picture before. So you've seen this slide again. We're in the station closure, fiscal reconciliation 2022 planning type phase when we reevaluate our training, reevaluate our agreements, talk about start end dates. That's kind of where we're at right now. But overall, the main idea is to identify station location, the purpose and timing, reach out to a local cooperator with a shared interest, and then we would draft that agreement and provide the station training and support, as well as various supplies if needed, such as buildings, wash units. Most of our stations now are set up pretty well with a permanent building that we can store things year round, as well as electrical utilities, things like that. So that has really helped the program excel this year, is just having that all set up in place. Real quick on law enforcement, once again, some type of law enforcement activity at all the stations across the state, mainly driven by boater safety and compliance. Compliance meaning all watercraft must stop. And so if a boater drives past the station, then there's a county sheriff or an Idaho State Police deputy sitting there that we can get them coming back. And that's really the main intent here, is just to get that boat coming back, and as well as the boater safety is concerned as well. But they're focused during high hours of traffic, and inspectors, regardless, can contact. Most of them are set up with the local dispatch if needed. And so you can see our local county as well as Idaho State Police listed there. Idaho Transportation Department, we continue to get their oversized load permits, especially those that are water-related equipment, watercraft, barges, dock systems, things like that. And then we also work with the Port of Entry staff, mainly during the winter months, on doing a refresh training for their staff, so that if we're closed, or if there's a large boat that goes through the weigh station portion of the complex, they know what to look for. They'll flip on the red light, and then they'll go out and do an inspection. And we've actually intercepted a few mussel-fowl boats this way. So you can see they're scattered throughout the state. And this Cottrell I-84 Port of Entry down there on I-84, that site is moving just west of the interchange, but the watercraft inspection portion of that project is going to remain where it's at. So we're working with ITD on making sure we have a good spot that fits within their complex. Go. Watercraft inspection training, we continue to revise this portion of the program. We have several different training options. This is something that Bethany works hard at during the winter months, and then she'll pull in other members of the team, making enhancements, updating information, finding new ways to train people. Different people learn different ways, and so we're looking at trying to incorporate that into the training. We do an in-person training session, an online webinar platform similar to this using WebEx, an online website video tutorials like you'll see here in the picture, and then a printed PowerPoint material, or the IWIT handbook. And so each one of these will have a series of knowledge reviews, or we call them, little quizzes that the inspector will go through to kind of test their knowledge on the task at hand. So we're going to jump in a little bit on watercraft inspection data and how we collect that. Probably remember back in 2009 and 10 were all paper forms and hand entry. We then moved to a mobile data solutions program that was either Windows based, and then we moved to an Android tablet based program. We used that for a number of years. And then since then we've moved to, again, an Android based system using tablets, but it's a Esri product called Survey 123. And it's a way that the inspectors can open up a program, document some information. In there, they can see an updated list of which water bodies are infested, whether it's red, or if it's black, then it's not infested. And so it just makes their data entry and so much easier, and our data compilation and QA/QC easier on our end as well. And putting this on a chart, you can see throughout the years that there's been an increase of inspections, and especially last year in 2020, we peaked at just over 130,000, but then you'll see a little bit of resurgence back in 2021. And I kind of started asking the question as, what could be driving this? I'm more concerned about which water body we're inspecting rather than the total volume. I'd rather inspect one high-risk boat than 10, low-risk local boaters. But it's just kind of interesting because programmatically, not a whole lot has changed since 2020 to 2021. And similar to other states that are seeing this same thing, not a whole lot has changed there as well. So I started asking the questions, and Stephen Phillips, which you'll hear from here in a little bit, compiles a lot of this data for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. You can see Idaho is bolded there. We ended at about 114,000. You'll see there's some other states that had a slight drop in inspections from last year compared to this year too. So I'm still trying to really pencil out, why that could be. I think 2020 was just a really interesting year on a lot of levels. But it's just kind of interesting to look at. You'll also see over the years, an increase of mussel-fouled boats. So you can see our 52 boats this year has surpassed any previous year before. And then similar out of Montana with 61 mussel-fouled boats. That's more than what they've ever seen before. Same with Washington. So on one hand, you could argue what you want to inspect as many boats as possible, but once again, you want to hone in on the boats that need inspected the most. Those high-risk boats are the ones that I want to be looking at. Moving on, just a dashboard snapshot. This was taken just the other day. This is probably similar to what it's going to end at after our data cleanup for this year. You can access this information online. I would anticipate having something very similar next year. And you can go through 2019, 2020, 2021 and see data from previous years as well. It's kind of interesting to look at. So 2021 inspections throughout the year. You can see we start out, February, March, start inspecting some boats. And I'll just remind the group that this is a lot of the snowbird demographic happening between February, March, April, May, that early season. So even though we're not inspecting very much volume, the boating season essentially has not started at this time. This is a very important time to be inspecting boats just because a lot of those boats are coming back from snowbirding down in lower Colorado. Then we get into the June, July, August, beginning of September months. This is the peak of the boating season, somewhere around 4th of July. We've seen this for a number of years. Each weekend essentially has a minor peak. You can see the holiday weekends, they extend that. And then, the crown jewel being 4th of July. And I'll say at Hutter, our highest volume site there on I-90 eastbound before Coeur d'Alene, on 4th of July, they can inspect a boat, every 4 minutes. So it's fast paced. It's a lot of volume. And then at the end of the season, it really just kind of trails off. Kids are going back in school. Other time commitments are becoming important, like school sports and activities. And so the boat's getting winterized and getting put into storage, as well as the RV trailers and a lot of the summertime toys. So there's kind of a year in a snapshot. So this is the boater zip code. We ask, where are you from? Basically give us your zip code, your residence. And you can see the hot areas being Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Sandpoint, that's those stations up in North Idaho, Boise, Magic Valley, Burley area, Twin Falls, and then you've got quite a bit around Idaho Falls and then Salt Lake. So just listing the top 10 towns or the zip codes where this is derived from. The strongest market is Spokane, Post Falls, Coeur d'Alene, Sandpoint, Bonners Ferry. That North Idaho panhandle where all those beautiful lakes are. Shortly thereafter, Boise, Hayden and Clark Fork there in North Idaho as well. But you'll see Salt Lake City. And then after that, you'll pick up Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, and those areas as well. So this is where the boater is from. More importantly, where are the boats coming from? So where have you been boating? And every quagga or zebra mussel infested water body is noted in red. So you can see a large portion down in Lake Powell in the lower Colorado, the Midwest, and the Great Lakes region. Okay, when you put this on a chart, the blue ones at the top, Pend Oreille, Coeur d'Alene, Priest, Coeur d'Alene, basically North Idaho, you got some CJ Strike, Roosevelt Lake, Salmon River, you got some of those popular areas. And then when you hone in on quagga or zebra mussel infested water bodies, Lake Powell definitely stands out, Havasu, Mead, the Colorado River, Lake Mead again, and then further on down the lower Colorado River drainage. So where are you going? Where's the next water body? You see once again that large interaction with North Idaho Panhandle. Boise is also showing up, and then any infested water body is red. You can see this is, again, it's biased towards the Pacific Northwest, and that's because of where our inspection stations are located and the direction of the traffic coming into the state. And so you would imagine the majority of the boaters are going into the Pacific Northwest. When you put these on a chart, Coeur d'Alene, Pend Oreille, Priest, once again that shows up. You see the CJ Strike and redfish, and then lower on down. So where is the boat going after the inspection? Now we're going to look at time, and you've seen a few reiterations of this chart over the years, especially as we looked at watercraft inspection at night. And I'll still say that the main bulk of the boating traffic is coming through during the daylight hours, probably somewhere between 9 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe creeping up to 5. And then it's mainly coming in on that lower portion of the graph, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you got your weekend warriors that are active during the day. And then you can see just a little bit of check marks in the middle, the middle of the night, and then later in the evening. Those are for our nighttime stations that may encounter watercraft in the evening or at night. But once again, the bulk of it is during the day, and most of the time it's on a weekend. So this is all stations throughout the year. Honing in a little bit on mussel-fouled watercraft, which stations they're coming through. You'll see Malad on I-15. You'll see Cedars on I-90. There are 2 Keystone stations. Malad inspected a lot of boats this year, and they intercepted a lot of mussel-fouled boats. The majority of those were coming from Lake Powell. Then you'll see Cottrell, 93, Hutter, Clark Fork, and then our own ISDA staff also become aware of watercraft and perform inspections, and we intercept a few mussel-fouled boats as well. Then we ask, where are you from again? The Great Lakes and the Midwest, I just collected them all up, and they're in the blue. Most of them are from the Great Lakes region. I think there was 1 or 2 from Kansas and Texas. The next main player is Lake Powell. There's just a close proximity to Lake Powell, and there's a lot of mussels there. And I will say Lake Powell is going to be interesting in the next coming months or years as we progress through this extended drought for the lower Colorado. Shoreline is, that water level is going down, exposing a lot of shoreline. And there are a lot of marinas and establishments based around that water resource that are going to have to ask themselves if they're going to move their marina, if they're going to extend their ramp, and what that's going to look like for the boating traffic down there in the future. And so it's something that we work pretty closely with Nate Owens down in Utah about that Utah to Idaho interaction, and we'll continue to do that. And then where are the mussel-fouled boats going after they leave? Well, they're going to Idaho, Washington. There are the 2 main ones. They're also going to Montana, British Columbia, Oregon, Wyoming, Alberta, and Alaska. So they're going to the Pacific Northwest. Okay. Now, mussel distribution across the United States has changed slightly. There's a few updates there. There's continues to be more water bodies added throughout the Midwest and the Great Lakes, and a couple more added in Texas. Okay. And then the Pacific Northwest through 2021 monitoring remains mussel free. I think we can all pat ourselves on the back in that regard, that the idea of prevention is still alive and well, and there's a lot of people working really hard at that. A quick update on Montana specifically is Canyon Ferry. Let's start there. It's been delisted a couple of years ago now. You can see that is now a yellow square. And then following their 2021 field season, which is complete, there were no detections. Montana Fish and Wildlife and Parks will petition for Tiber or Lake Elwell to be delisted, which that is just great news. And so, I would envision that will be approved, and then next year we will once again be the 5 main Pacific Northwest states and a couple of Canadian provinces being mussel-free. Just to show you the series of nets throughout the state, and you've seen this before. It really starts out as origin decontamination and pre-notification documents being sent to either neighboring states or Idaho. We continue to receive those communications through various ways. The neighboring states perform inspections before they get to Idaho. Idaho's inspection stations that are surrounded throughout the state, as well as the port of entry staff. Oftentimes we will get a boat owner request that will come in for an inspection. And then there are several local entities working very water body specific, whether that's a roving crew or a marina that may become aware of an issue and then give us a call. Once again, we're all playing by the same rules. That's that UMP standard, which the latest revision, UMPS number 4, has been published. It's available online. There is a new call before you haul program that's being initiated here pretty shortly. I believe it's already been launched and we're kind of phasing it into. But call before you haul is specifically driven towards the oversized load and commercial hauler for watercraft. And so they will get a bulletin and they'll have this call before you haul direction that they can basically call a center, and that call center will email out a notification to where the boats are going, which is going to be really, really helpful. And so that's kind of the series of communication and network as you come into the Columbia River Basin. Shifting gears real quick to monitoring. This year was our 12th year. There were no detections for quagga and zero mussels in the state of Idaho, whether that was through Vellager, plankton toe sampling, or adult monitoring. We use a similar data collection form as the watercraft inspection using Survey 123. Once again, we will do focus blitz surveys in different regions or different water bodies or watersheds to manage workload. Say if there's a bunch of Vellager samples to take up in North Idaho, we will all travel to North Idaho and try to blitz that area. We do have great assistance from partners across the state, whether that's Coeur d'Alene Tribe, Shoshone, Paiute, Limhi County, Idaho Powers. It's always been very active. And then if a detection were to occur, we would initiate the Idaho Rapid Response Plan that's specific to dry-scented mussels. And I'll go through that a little bit. This year we collected over 1,600 samples from 119 distinct or unique water bodies. And we collected just under 1,300 adult surveys. This includes reservoir drawdown or substrate sampling or benthic grabs. And then I mentioned earlier, but we did shift a little bit of that monitoring focus towards the urban ponds and places where we would theoretically think an aquarium would be dumped for the Marimo mossball issue. And a lot of this information is available online via our monitoring web map, which we will post the link online. This is what that web map looks like. You can scroll through and see a lot of the monitoring occurring up in Kim's area in North Idaho, down here in Southwest Idaho and Bethany's area, Twin Falls and Idaho Falls as well. And we really follow drainages and sample throughout the whole drainage rather than one specific area of one specific lake. And then we also try to spread them out throughout the season as well. So we're out there every 2 weeks or bi-monthly collecting plankton tows for these critical water bodies. A little bit on the rapid response plan. It aligns with other the region plan as well as other states. Focuses once again on that verification and communication process, similar to what we essentially just did with the Marimo mothball issue. And we're always learning from other states' experiences. The most recent one was in September at Fort Peck. Invasive Species Action Network was a facilitator. Stephen Phillips with the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission also helps put these on as well. And those documents are available online through westernais.org. And so you'll see a couple of the Idaho rapid response exercise and their follow-up documents as well as all the other states. Okay, we're kind of ramping up here. Other species of concern, we did have a detection of red swamp crayfish, or the Procrambrius clarkii, in a small stormwater pond in Lewiston. Kind of an interesting story. This was actually detected by the Lewiston High School science class, and they brought in crayfish as part of their curriculum, as well as other water quality issues. And they deployed some crayfish traps, and they found something of concern. So they started asking questions. One of their first contacts was the University of Idaho, and they since have sent some tissue off to University of Illinois for DNA sequencing, which has been confirmed. It's actually pretty closely related to the Seattle, Washington, and Willamette Valley, Oregon populations. Our ISDA staff have been out multiple times, surveying the ponds. We did a coordination call, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will take the lead on the trapping to help delineate the population, to help inform the next steps forward. And then also on the side, the Lewiston High School will continue their survey as part of their curriculum that they're currently doing. This really speaks to, one, see something, say something, and really engaging partners at a very local level. And so, great work by the Lewiston High School on finding this stuff and telling folks about it. And then we will be actively participating in kind of the next steps forward and what we're going to do with these ponds. At a higher level, this coordination happens through the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, the CRB team, which we have a meeting coming up, the Western Regional Panel. We have monthly invasive species coordinating calls, as well as Lloyd participates in the Western Governors Association and their invasive species working group, and then just various other calls. And so if it's more programmatic or operation specific, I may sit on those calls. If it's more legislative or budget type topics, then Lloyd may sit on those calls, or we may both sit on them. It just kind of depends on what's being talked about. So we're actively engaging with other folks doing similar work across the state. And then lastly, and just to end the presentation on our outreach program, we have various campaigns, various pathways that we're trying to reach different people on. And then whether it's media like radio and Facebook and all different types of platforms, or if it's more organic grassroots like outreach events, one-on-one conversations, working through our inspection stations and that type of outreach. Really good stuff happening this year. I wish I could share more about, the impressions and the number of people that we theoretically reached with our media. There's just not enough time. So I've already gone over on time. And anyways, with that, is there any questions on the invasive species program, Marimo mothballs, watercraft inspection monitoring? Any questions for me? Okay. For the participants list, I did see Stephen Phillips has joined us. Thank you, Stephen. He works for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, also known as the Quagga Czar. Thank you for joining.
Good to be here.
Okay, I think that's it for new participants. And Stephen, we're running a little behind agenda. We still have the invasive pest program, the CAPS program review to do, and then you're up.
Okay, Nick, thanks.
Okay, so if Darcy or Paul, if you want to take the reins and share your screen. I'm not seeing any questions for the invasive side of the program, so go ahead. Darcy, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
I'm here. Thanks, Nick.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry. My name is Darcy Heckathorn. I'm the pest survey coordinator for ISDA. I work alongside with Paul Castroville, our entomologist, and I'm here to give you the update on our pest survey surveys for the 2021 field survey or season. So at ISDA, we attempt to protect the plants here in Idaho from non-native invasive insect pests using state funds and federal resources from the CAPS program, the Cooperative Agriculture Pest Survey Program, and the Plant Protection Act, Section 7721. So first I'm going to go over our CAPS surveys that we did for this season. We did the pine commodity survey and the corn commodity survey and the national honeybee survey. So first off, we did the pine commodity survey. That kicked off in May and it ended mid-August. Our target pests were pine tree lappet moth and Siberian silk moth, pine sawfly, and pine processionary moth. We targeted 31 nurseries, or 31 nurseries were surveyed in the following counties. And if you look at the map on the right side in the red counties, those are the counties that were surveyed. 100 traps per pest. So about 100 or 1 to 4 traps were set out throughout each nursery. The traps were checked every 2 weeks, and all traps were negative for that survey. So for our corn commodity survey, we stats kicked off in June and went until mid-September. We surveyed 100 cornfields throughout the following counties. And over on the right in the map, the counties in green are the counties we surveyed. 2 traps per pest per field were set out. The target pests were European corn borer and silver white moth. Those traps were also checked every 2 weeks. We also did 2 visual surveys that were conducted for each cornfield in late June and in August. And those targets were black maize beetle, cucurbit beetle, Philippine downy mildew, and late wilt on corn. All the traps were negative and visual surveys were negative. So for our honeybee health survey, the honeybee health survey started in June and ended in October. We surveyed 19 apiary, were surveyed throughout Idaho. Of the 19 apiaries, 5 of them were surveyed twice, once in the spring before honey flow, and then once again in the fall after honey was pulled. Surveys done twice were called longitudinal surveys. Those surveys had pollen or wax samples taken for pesticide analysis. Major survey targets were AAA lapse mite and slow bee paralysis virus and Asian honeybee. Other targets were acute bee paralysis, chronic bee paralysis virus, deformed wing virus, and Israel acute paralysis virus. So I know I'm going pretty quick through this. So for our state funded surveys, we did Japanese beetle, gypsy moth, apple maggot, and European pine shoot moth. I guess I should step back. Was there any questions for our CAP surveys? So moving on with our state funded surveys. We did Japanese beetle, gypsy moth, apple maggot, and European pine shoot moth. So first off, our Japanese beetle survey. You know, the Japanese beetle survey, or Japanese beetle, is a scarab beetle native to Japan, found in New Jersey, nursery in 1916. The JB grub feeds on organic matter in the soil and roots on grass, including turf grass. The adults feed on over 300 host plants. So for our survey here in Idaho, we had 375 detection traps across the state. And over on the map on the right, all those blue dots are our detection traps. For our delimit traps, we had 354 traps set out. Boise delimit traps were 250 traps in the Boise area. And then Pocatello delimit was 104. So for our beetle catches for 2021 for Boise area, for 2021, we caught 0. For 2020, we caught 0. For 2019, we caught 0. So for the Boise area, our plan is for 2022, we're going to drop the Boise delimit block. We consider that area eradicated. So for Pocatello, for 2021, we caught 11 Japanese beetle. 2020, we caught 7. And 2019, we caught 4. We will continue that that delimit block for the 2022 season. And so this year, we caught a new catch in Caldwell. We caught 1 beetle, and we will do a delimit block in that area. So once again, our plan for the 2022 season is to do 2 treatments in Pocatello, 1 at Centennial Park, and the other one at Rainy Park. We'll maintain the delimitation in Pocatello at 49 traps, and we'll start a delimitation in Caldwell at about 49 traps. And this is showing our delimit grids for Caldwell and Pocatello. There will be some moving around of some traps in the Caldwell area, but this will be our grids for the 2 delimit blocks. So for our gypsy moth survey, we work close with the Idaho Department of Lands and the Forest Service. For 2021 gypsy moth survey, we had a total of between Department of Lands and Forest Service and ISDA, we had 2,562 traps. between IDL and Forest Service Region 1, which is up north. In the up north region, they did 1,855 gypsy moth traps. ISDA put 637 traps. Forest Service Region 3 put 70 traps out. And out of all those traps, all traps were negative for gypsy moth. So for our apple maggot program, so we put we have found apple maggot in Idaho in the following counties: Boise, Jim, and Washington. ISDA set out 344 apple maggot traps in the following counties. And as of right now, our ISD entomologist is still working on identifying all potential positive AM catches at this time. For our European pine shoot moth survey, ISDA has 12 counties that are uninfested. And our ISDA staff set out 5 traps in each of the uninfested counties. And in 3 of our infested counties, traps are set out in commercial nurseries that request trapping for European pine shoot moth for shipping purposes to Montana and California. And for 2021, all of our European pine shoot moth traps were negative for European pine shoot moth. And last but not least, the murder hornet update. We have our first report was received February 19th and last report on October 4th. We had 192 reports. And of those reports, 167 were accompanied by photos or specimens. We had 110 west cicada killers, 2 elm sawfly, 22 horntail wasps, and 0 murder hornets. 33 were various wasps, such as bald-faced hornet or golden digger wasp, bumblebees, Jerusalem crickets, or burrowing beetles. And that is the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, I can take them at this time.
Excellent. Thank you, Darcy. Great update. And cheers to no murder hornets in Idaho. There were a few phone calls, right? Any questions for CAPS program, invasive pests, pest survey? Feel free to drop them in the chat. In the meantime, I will get Stephen Phillips' presentation teed up. Okay, hearing no questions, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. We can probably move forward. Stephen, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me, Nick?
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Go ahead. The floor is all yours. Stephen Phillips, Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, and Quagazar for the West. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and hi, everyone. Good to be with you. So, going to go over some federal legislation and appropriations information. Next slide, please. Talk about WRDA, AIS legislation appropriations. Next slide, please. So a lot of the information I'll be sharing is on our website, westernais.org. There's an AIS legislative tracker. And then we also have a WORDA page that includes all of the legislative AIS WORDA language. It doesn't include all the appropriations language, but that may be helpful for some of you as we go forward. Next slide, please. So WORDA, that has funded Idaho's watercraft inspection and monitoring programs over the last several years. The process began in 2014, and then Congress every 2 years has reauthorized the act, 14, 16, 18, and 20, adding additional watersheds covered by the legislation. And I just yesterday saw a notice. Staff is working on 2022 reauthorization, so expect to see that sometime probably in the winter. They've been, as you can see, pretty good about reauthorizing this biannually, so I'm sure we'll see another bill early next year. Next slide, please. For a little bit of background on the WORDA AIS program with the Corps of Engineers, managed out of Walla Walla. Watercraft inspection began in 2017, followed by monitoring later that summer. We finally got the flowering rush agreement in place this year. And we also have a rapid response agreement for cost shares for rapid response activities. We'll be getting work plans from the states in 2022 to make that active. We are the administrator, the non-federal partner for the 4 Columbia River Basin states, and Wyoming and Nevada do have a footprint in the Columbia River Basin. We're adding Wyoming and Nevada in 2022. Folks always ask about how long is our WORDA money going to last for? Well, for 2022, we're in really good shape for watercraft inspection, monitoring, and flowering rush. I think for 23, we'll be fine. And then 24, still, there's plenty of money on the books right now, even with the expanded watersheds, and I'll show you that slide next to fund the programs going into the near future. And as we always talk about, coordination will be critical to make sure we're making the best use out of all our watercraft inspection stations. Looks like North Dakota is getting a lot more active. They're going to be added to the watercraft inspection database out of Colorado. So that's good. We need protection to the east. So these new basins coming online is going to be helpful. Next slide, please. So this is what the congressionally mandated WORDA watersheds look like right now. Columbia, Upper Missouri, Upper Colorado, South Platte, Arkansas, and you'll see there the Russian. And a side story on the Russian River, Representative Mike Thompson, that's part of his district. He, about 10 years ago, let's see this, about 10 years ago, he's the co-chair of the Invasive Species Caucus in Congress. And he was very instrumental in assisting with WORDA in the early days. So it's not a surprise the Russian River is added, and that's also, if you drink wine, you've probably had wine from that area, Napa Valley, is irrigated with that water as well. So now there are a lot of watersheds. The Upper Missouri, Upper Colorado, and South Platte are going to come online with the match program in early 2022. Probably, if I'd have to guess, I'd say March, it'll be up and running. Then followed by the Arkansas. Next slide, please. Okay, the other part, in 2020, WORDA language was added for adjoining watersheds between the United States and Canada to the cost share program. So, adjoining watersheds, Great Lakes, Missouri, Columbia, Fraser River actually dips down into northern Washington, not very far from where I live. And then there's also the Yukon up in Alaska. So the Corps has not started working on this portion of WRDA 2020. I don't think they're going to get to it till perhaps later in 2022. They're going to need to set up an agreement with Canada on how this cost share portion of the project will work. So that'll be interesting to follow and see what happens. Next slide, please. Okay, talk a little bit about what bills in the current Congress that have aquatic invasive species and invasive species funding. Next, please. So we've got, just to go down the list, Lake Tahoe reauthorization for their act, and they've got a good chunk that goes to aquatic invasive species. There's the Cruz-Gomert Act, which if there's a non-native species, you can't list it as an endangered species, which makes sense. And then further down the last two, the Civilian Conservation Corps Acts of 2021. There's a couple of versions of those, and those are also contained. I think we'll see it's about $2 billion, believe it or not, in the Build Back Better reconciliation bill. And the idea here is it'd be like Civilian Conservation Corps. They would do projects, and some of those would involve invasive species. So next slide, please. Just a bill that had this White House bill that just happened to mention forest pests. I threw that in there. There's been no action on that. Below that is the Levin and Gosar bills. And this is of interest as we get more and more renewable energy on land and in the ocean. And the ocean part, what's our commission is really concerned about because its impact on fishing grounds. They would set up a fund, a mitigation fund. We're going to see more of this as we develop more of these projects and the impacts that it has, because, you know, anytime you produce energy, you're going to have an impact. So this would set up a fund. Next slide, please. I put this one in here. It's because it's unique in that they want to set up this Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act, and they're going to fund it with a new tax on virgin plastic manufacturers. The plastic manufacturers are not too thrilled with this bill, so I don't know how far it's going to go. But the interesting part is that they've got some marketing language in there for invasive species. In the U.S., we have a lot of protein swimming around out there that's not being utilized. Asian carp being one, and then the other one is shad. And if you're interested in shad, there's a new report out from the Northwest Power Planning Council's Science Board. And then the headline that came out on this report is there's a lot more shad in the river now than salmon. And I mean, I fish for shad. They're all over the place. They're easy to catch. And so attempts have been made to market these fish with limited success. You know, my recipe is you put a shad in a big rock in a boiling pot of water, and you throw the shad out and eat the rock. So if people can figure out a way to market this protein, and again, if we were in a poorer country with a lack of protein, we'd be eating shad. But right now they're considered a quote unquote trash fish. So it's good to see these types of bills and marketing of underutilized species. Next slide, please. This is actually a pretty important bill from Senator Rubio, and there was a court case brought against the Department of Interior, Sally Jewell. Now it was Obama administration that kind of cut the regulatory authority of the Lacey Act in half. And so this bill would reinstate the interstate transport ban. You can see what NASMA said about this. There's not been a lot of activity on this bill, so we're hoping it gets picked up next year. But when Nick talked about mothballs, and that's just an example of how this legislation will help reinstitute some of the regulations that the feds are able to use. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a RAWA has been introduced in the last 3 Congresses. As you can see, it's a big bill for wildlife and fish and state fish and wildlife agencies. Hang on, we got a cat here. And part of the money from this would go toward, could be used for invasive species. Both the Senate and the House bills, the Senate more recently, have had hearings on this. There's good support on both sides of the aisle. There's lots of co-sponsors on both sides of the aisle. The problem is they're going to have to get around is how they're going to pay for this thing. That is not, in one of the bills, they've got a, they would use environmental fines to help pay for it, but it's $1 billion bill. So there's concern that there may not be enough money to fund it. So that's the one thing that they're going to try to figure out. My humble opinion is they're throwing so much money around these days that this type of thing, this bill should make it, but we'll see what happens with the pay force. Next slide, please. Another bill that we've seen before, Stop the Spread of Invasive Mussels Act, and this time it was introduced by Garamendi and Amodei, a Democrat and a Republican. It sets up a BOR cost share program for watercraft inspection, similar to what the WRDA Corps of Engineers program is. But one of the things that we were able to do was get the cost share knocked down to 25%. This is important as many states in the West, especially the smaller agencies in the Missouri Basin, match has been an issue. So that was one thing we did get changed in this bill. It does set up watercraft inspection and decontamination authority for federal agency members of the ANSTF, Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force. Next slide, please. But here's the issue, and Idaho knows this issue well. We're coming up on 15 years of the Lake Mead quagga mussel infestation, and Idaho was in the lead on this, of requiring the federal government on federal waters to decontaminate watercraft, and that they must do it. And what have we done early on is this is how we kicked off our watercraft inspection program, is because we kept getting a lot of boats from Lake Mead. And the way to stop them is you take care of them at the source, or you set up a ring of inspection stations to protect the Columbia River Basin, and that's what we did. Now, anything I'm saying, it's not a slight at the work, you know, of the programs that Lake Mead and Glen Canyon National Recreation Area and Lake Powell are performing with the states. Got a lot of really good cooperation. The program works pretty well, but as you can see, as I've highlighted there, it's mandatory inspection and decontamination, but the agency may do it. It doesn't say shall or must. So we'll continue to push on this. We have not been able to crack the nut of making the federal government, requiring the federal government to decontaminate these watercraft. So as long as I'm around, we'll keep pushing it. And it's regardless, it's good to have this bill. I like the BOR. We like the BOR cost share program. That's good. So we'll, again, we'll take it a step at a time with this program with the feds. Next slide, please. Another bill that sets up a BOR cost share programs, the Outdoor Recreation Act. This has a lot more to it than just watercraft. But we had worked with Senate Energy and Water staff on the minority side, Barrasso staffers, to fine tune this bill. Again, we wanted them to, instead of having the word may there, at least get the word shall or must inspect, but we didn't get it. And this language is here because the Democrats, Republicans could not agree on the BOR cost share program and then some of the other elements of the bill. So there's two bills out there. So hopefully in the end, they'll get together and at least get through the Bureau of Reclamation portion of this cost share program. Again, good bipartisan support. This bill also has a 75%, 25% match. So we'll look forward to seeing that next year, and hopefully they can get it passed. Next, please. Okay, HR 3684 passed, signed into law, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. $1.2 trillion. Just threw in here because we do a lot of salmon work at the commission. I know the state of Idaho is very interested too. There's a bunch of money in there for salmon recovery. There's also invasive species language. Department of Transportation has got a $250 million a year program that includes prevention for invasive species. The next section down, there's an invasive plant elimination program, $50 million on federal highways, $50 million each year for 5. Next slide, please. The one that we're watching really closely is this ecosystem restoration under the Department of Interior, $200 million over a 5-year period, and $100 million of that goes to Interior. Part of it goes to agriculture. So right now, the Department of Interior is in the process of rolling out the spend plan for this. So we're paying very close attention. There is also some BOR grant program in there. I think it's at $100 million for watershed health. And watershed health includes protection of invasive species. So there's that as well. So there's a lot in that bill that could come both into the aquatic and terrestrial invasive species worlds for us. Next slide, please. So this is the Build Back Better reconciliation bill that they have been haggling over for many months. There is, I don't know if I got all the language, but there's bits and pieces of invasive species language in here as well. $242 million for National Wildlife Refuge System, invasive species included. Forest health, $50 million. And then there's that Civilian Climate Corps. And that is $2 billion, isn't it? Yeah, $2.25 billion for that. That's gotten some pushback, and it's kind of interesting is that the Republicans have come out and said, are these going to be, community environmental activists that are pushing a climate change message, and what's this money going to be used for? So whether this, and personally, I think it's a good idea. I'm an old Peace Corps volunteer and Student Conservation Association volunteer. I think my father-in-law was in the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s, but this is, I think there's some good here. So we'll see if anything pops out and this thing gets funded. Next slide, please. Okay, quickly through appropriations. FY22, this is still in play. They weren't able to get appropriations done in this calendar year. And we've got $45 million for aquatic invasive species in the Fish and Wildlife Service budget. If you go back to FY 2019, it was only funded at $21 million. So there's a good chunk of money in there. The money, any federal monies that Idaho is getting are going to either stay the same or increase. In this FY22 bill, it's been passed out of the House along party lines. So next slide, please. And then the one we really pay attention to is energy and water with the U.S. Corps of Engineers Word and Match program. They bumped up the watercraft inspection pot from 15 million to 17 million. $3 million, that's flat funded. And then they've got some, again, they are funding the Flowering Rush and Hydrilla Match program, which the state of Idaho is involved in as well. Next slide, please. Senate, next slide, please. Appropriations. On the energy and water side, it's flat funded at 15 million for watercraft, 3 for monitoring, 1 for Flowering Rush. Next, please. Fish and Wildlife Service, similar to the House, it's a few $1 million lower, though I think they make it up in another spot in the budget. But the gains that we've realized in the last 3 years are all there. Next slide, please. So what is next? The FY22 appropriations, the government is funded through February 18th. Then they will, I had to bet, probably do a omnibus bill like they've done in the last few years. There's a chance they will do a continuing resolution with the FY21 mark. And that would mean, a slight reduction in the amount of money available. But again, we've done really well in the last few years. So I think either way will be fine. Obviously, we want the FY22 to go through. Build Back Better, they're still grappling with that back on Capitol Hill, trying to get a vote done by Christmas. We'll see what happens. And then looking into next year again, the RAWA bill, the Garamendi Watercraft Inspection BOR bill, the Lacey Act, Rubio bill, and water reauthorization. And briefly, we are continuing with our state partners, and Nick and Lloyd are involved in this, setting up some additional tools for hauler outreach through an 800 number that we are going to work with the Department of Transportation's, especially for boats coming out of the Southwest and the Great Lakes. And then on mossballs, in the end, the federal government did a good job of routing all the mossballs through now Los Angeles and New York. But I don't think the story is over on this mossball thing yet. I think mossballs might still be getting in via UPS person-to-person shipping. Haven't found, what I can see is a lot of evidence of mussels being in those mossballs. But again, we still have work to do. And at the state level, having a quarantine on mossballs is a good way for the state to look at reducing the threat. So we're going to keep an eye on this one and encourage the federal government to work together at their agency level to reduce the threat. Next slide, please. And that's it. There's our website. We do have a biweekly AAS newsletter. If you're interested, please shoot me an email and I'll add you to the list. And so with that, any questions are always welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. Great update. Any questions from the group specifically for Stephen and his update?
Stephen, this is Lloyd. I touched on before you were on with the group when we were talking about budget issues and whatnot. I talked about the work and conversations you'd had on your end with relation to vaccine mandate and all of that with the Corps. I just kind of referenced that you had a series of meetings, that it was obviously an important topic of conversation for a number of the Western states. I know Idaho and Montana in particular had some concerns. Anything to add related to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Lloyd. Early on, about a month, 2 months ago, we started to become concerned that, especially for my program, our program, through in terms of federal contracts, where we manage a lot of federal contracts, whether they're going to require our subcontractors to go through a vaccine documentation process, and we have not seen anything like that come down. I don't think we will. In Oregon and Washington, it's a moot point because they're requiring vaccination of everyone. Idaho, Montana are different. So at this point, the federal reach is not going to go down right now as we see it into the contractual level, but nothing surprises me anymore. So I think we just wait and see, but I think we're, for now, and the Corps of Engineers, Lloyd, has also said they are not aware of any restrictions. So I think we're fine, but we're going to keep a very close eye on it. It's important.
And finally, I think for the good of the group, and I know you and I have had a number of conversations, and we do on some of our regional calls, talk just a little bit about what you're kind of seeing and hearing out of the administration. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of congressional action and funding, and that, what's kind of the working environment like with Interior and some of those other agencies from a DC kind of policy perspective?
Yeah, so good question, Lloyd. What we've seen so far is that climate change takes up a lot of the room. In conversations with Interior employees, the work that we did in the previous administrations, especially last administration, safeguarding the West and all of that, I think they're still kind of feeling their way. And at this point, we're in pretty good shape. The importation mothballs and Lasiac thing on the regulatory side, I think we're going to want to try to crank down on, and then continue to put pressure on federal waters and how they decontaminate their watercraft. I was glad to hear that they are thinking about and have had at least one meeting regarding the infrastructure bill and that $100 million. NISA is coming up, and that's when we typically go back and are able to talk to upper level leadership at Interior. I don't know if anything's like that's going to be set up this year. I think there's going to be probably a smaller contingent going back to DC at the end of February. But I think we're expecting to see something. They got to spend this money that's in the infrastructure bill. So I think that will be our lead into maybe increased participation from the new administration.
I think for the good of the group, I know there's been some discussion with that infrastructure bill, and I know there'll be probably, and I know just from some of the other conversations on some other regional and national calls that I know I've been on, and I think probably Nick and Jeremy too, there'll probably be some big chunks of money come through to other agencies that'll have mention in there of weeds or invasives, and those will come through your funding streams, for example, to transportation or others. That's going to be unique in your funding environment. If you need any assistance at all, or if we can provide anything to be of assistance to, help apply or make plans for that money. But I think they'll be very unique to come through on the infrastructure related to some of those departments. And that 100 million and some of that, there's big chunks of money out there that'll probably be available at some point when it makes it through that federal process. And money is probably not going to be our issue, or at least a shortage of that as we go through the next few years. It seems like there's lots of it out there. It's going to be a matter of probably targeting and prioritizing it along the way.
Amen.
Stephen, thank you. I, for the good of the group, Stephen is one of those that, I mean, we've jokingly, or maybe not even jokingly, refer to him as the Quagga Czar and whatnot, but he plays an important role in the region and nationally for us as a clearinghouse, obviously, for a lot of information related to the federal government and funding and agreements and all of that. He's a very important partner to our group. You've heard from him before, and I think I've said it before, but it bears repeating that Stephen and the work that he does with Pacific States and with the rest of us from WRP and CRB and all of those other acronyms, it's we appreciate you taking the time, Stephen, and the help and partnership you provide for us.
Thank you, Lloyd. It was good to talk to you folks, and everybody have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Back at you. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Well, at this point, you know, in the agenda, we usually do a partner update or a roundtable update from anybody who wants to provide what you've been working on, especially related to invasive species, noxious weed, or invasive pests is concerned. And then we'll open it up for public comment, if any. So we're kind of nearing the end of the meeting. You can either just unmute to give an update, or you can use the chat. But feel free, if you've got an update, please give one. Not everybody jump in at once. Okay. And then any public comment from the group? Okay. I know it's kind of tricky with these virtual meeting platforms to try to get what you need to say heard and put it out there. But with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining the Idaho Invasive Species Council meeting. This is actually the same date that we did last year. I know I received a number of emails and phone calls, you know, later last week and this week with some scheduling conflicts. This is a tricky time of year in between a couple of holidays to try to pick the best fit date. That'll probably be the case tomorrow as well for the noxious weed meeting. But anyways, thank you again for the great discussion today. And then we'll have a similar meeting. Usually that's in April or May for our spring meeting. Generally that one's a little bit little more participation in that meeting as folks kind of ramp up for the field season. So any comments, Lloyd or Jeremy, Paul or Darcy, any closing comments?
We do have the ability, we recorded this meeting and we do have the ability to send links out to folks. So I think you'll see an email blast. I think, Nick, we ought to send one out and offer that we can send that link to those that weren't able to make it so they could listen in on this as well and obviously see all the presentations. That's one benefit to this platform. We can send that and not have to just send attachments after attachments. But if you need any of that kind of stuff as an attachment, let Jeremy or Nick or any of the others know and we can sure get that for you. But appreciate everybody's time.
Great, thanks, Lloyd. And we'll also post a PDF of the slides on the Invasive Species Council website. That's on the invasivespecies.idaho.gov website. It's housed within that. Also, another thing to bring up to note is the Invasive Species Strategic Plan, which is a 5-year plan. It was last updated in 2017. It is up for renewal. It expires in 2021. That's something that we're looking at this winter is kind of a wintertime project and making updates to that plan. Jeremy had mentioned that before as well on the noxious weed side. And so as we start getting drafts of that plan, we'll try to distribute that for potentially an approval spring of 2022. And then we'll post a new plan, which most likely be, again, a 5-year plan starting 2022. Any questions on the Invasive Species Strategic Plan? Okay, I know I failed to mention that before. All right, with that, great discussion today. Thank you for all who provided updates, and Happy holidays. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thanks, you guys.